was super, super, super interesting. So many themes that ran through those conversations that I was taking notes on and thinking about. I'll pose this question to those of you who are here, and then we'll expand it to some others. But I'm one particular tension. Hi, Sophia.
Hey.
One thing that really struck me, especially listening to Greg and Sophia's talk side by side, when I'm trying to get people from different functions aligned and working together, the first thing I try to do, even when we're not in a room, is to say, let's all come together for a synchronous conversation, and we're going to start together and talk about what we're trying to accomplish and do the work together so that nobody feels like they're on the receiving end of a handoff and everybody's working in the same synchronous space. But I know that also for far-flung distributed teams, sometimes you don't have the option of doing that. You can't really say, let's all get an hour on the calendar and work through this thing together. How do we balance that tension between having everybody starting from the same place together, working together in the same space, whether that's a physical space or a digital space, and also getting those benefits of distributed work where people can work at their own pace, at their own time, without that turning into a series of handoffs?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. So the first, what I will say based on my experience is changing the perception of what it means to start something together. Because you start together, the idea, if you're in an office, it's like getting a meeting, right? And if you're working remotely, it's getting on a call at the same time. But if you're distributed, starting together might be in different times. It's just that the project starts like today, for example, but it might start in different days from people. Because the feeling of I belong to this and I am adding value and my opinion is being considered has nothing to do with the timing. It has everything with the idea that I know that when I share my opinion, somebody's going to listen to it and it's going to be respected and we're going to have the time to think through it. It's not going to be ignored. So people don't, in my experience, people don't care so much about this idea of who starts the document or who starts the first discussion. People care more about if I add value in the middle of this discussion or a week later, then my opinion will help and actually my opinion will be heard. That's it. So the handover doesn't happen, the handover constantly, because you don't have to be doing that because you're collaborating constantly on the document, constantly in conversations on Slack, for example. So it is less about when you start and more that the process of getting together always. And the collaboration part. So I don't know if that makes sense, but we never had that issue. What we did in the past is we could create a Loom video and say, this is what we want to do, blah, 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 background, and then here's the Google Doc. And I wrote some principles there. Off you go. So whenever you see the document in a day's time, you're just going to start working on that. And that's it. So things happen that way in our case.
Yeah, I mean, I can actually confirm that also, like being from a marketing, point of view myself, like my team sometimes doesn't have everything we need, to proceed at the very early stage of ideation. If the product owner doesn't really know where this is going, we might need some more, information to produce actual banners and content and, copy and everything. So it's a great thing to just try to be as synchronous as we can throughout the process. We don't have to start together, but we have to keep communication open throughout the process. So we have a small, catch up in the beginning, then maybe we have a proper briefing with the product owner later. Then, we kind of run them through our idea and see if we are aligned. So this is actually a process that just keeps going throughout all the stages of the development process. So people just add to the process whatever they think, they're ready to contribute. And so, yeah, I agree with Sofia.
The only thing I'd chime in there is, I think you'll be successful in that manner if you have the same level of trust throughout all of your cross-functional partners. And if you don't, right, it's then wherever that trust is, you got to work on that first. Or you've got to divert to what that person or group is going to be comfortable with. otherwise you'll probably move forward, but there'll always be that contention, and it'll always kind of be there, on the back of the project.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. One thing that kind of connects those dots, I've been trying more and more to hold myself accountable to making things unfinished by design. So rather than finishing like a product spec or something and handing it off, using constraints to make sure and make clear that what I'm doing is not finished, so that I can build that trust with partners by having them participate in the creation of the document rather than handing it off and being like, this is done, go do this. Being like, the way I do it, there's a website I put up at onepage1hour.com, is to say, like, I will never spend more than 1 page in 1 hour on anything before I share it. So if you're a designer and you're getting something from me, if you're an engineer and you're getting something from me, you know that I expect your input and I expect this to be co-created. It's not something I'm handing off to you and then expecting you to just go and make the dang thing, because nobody likes that. There was one thing, I think, Konstantinos, this was your comment about, I really like the phrase you used, corridor chatter, which sounds much classier than water cooler talk. I was like, ooh, corridor chatter. That sounds like that's classy as hell.
I can actually take the Greek term we use for this. We call it in Greek, like, the wells that you draw water from in the ground, like a well. So when people walk in the corridor, we call that like a tiny little well. So people just kind of like make a little circle and just like chatter. So that is a term that's very popular in our culture. That's
great. Thank you. I learned many things. Thank you. This is an unfair oversimplification question, but I feel like as I have gone remote, I have gone from feeling that corridor chatter is good to feeling that corridor chatter is bad. Again, that is an unfair generalization, but if you have to pick a side, a thumbs up for corridor chatter is good or a thumbs down for corridor chatter is bad. Where are you right now?
It's biased towards how much time you spend at the corridor. If you don't spend a lot of time at the corridor, you feel left out. If you're always at the corridor, you're it.
Yeah.
But if you had to choose, Alexis, you have to make a choice. Like,
it's not only the corridor, it's the smoking too. It's the smoking room chat. So I wouldn't take up smoking. So no.
So one of the things we've found in talking to a bunch of teams is having gone remote, they're finding that a lot of people have a tendency to work longer hours, to the point of leaders having to prescribe like lunch hours or even office hours. And they just, they'll just tell you flat out, I don't want to see you online. And I think some of the work is, especially for those that don't live with families, that are also probably, or worse, they're 5 or 6 people in a New York flat, right, on top of each other. I think that need for connection is genuine. And so, where you might be able to have that hallway conversation or whatnot, I think, even that small talk, I found like that's it's been super important for a lot of people right now.
I wanted to add something. There's a lot of nuance there, because depending on how you establish the connection. So you can, and again, maybe it's because we are so freaky about documentation and talking and establishing those rituals, but you can essentially say, like, if you feel that you need connection, you want to connect, these are ways they are good that will not cause, the negative side of effects of it. So it feels like a very controlling, all the things that I'm saying, but it just gives safety. It makes you feel relaxed because you don't have to think about them. Somebody already designed a system that you can improve as well, but it give you the parameters that so you're not going off the rails. So it's actually providing more structure is a lot better. But one thing that I wanted to mention around getting to know people and what they need, when you were talking about the department in New York and so on. We have this engineer that works, he's in Osaka in Japan. And he will stay very long hours. And he used to do that when he used to live in Lisbon too. And I kept saying, get offline. This is not okay. You're going to get ill. You don't have to do it, because he will also be sometimes in the morning. And so it was just too much. He's like, why are you doing this? And over time, after many one-on-ones and so on, we understood that the way that he wanted to work is that he wanted to wake up in the morning very late, do nothing until the afternoon, do whatever he wanted to do, go for lunch, have fun, whatever. And then he wanted to start working at 4 p.m. and he loved working until 2, 3 in the morning. That's his deal. So I cannot tell that person go offline because I'm telling him, no, don't work the way you want to work. So I need to understand that for some people, that is the way they want to do it. Some other people like me, I have to be on at 5 a.m. because I like that, but I'm dead at 4 p.m. So I'm gone at 4 p.m. My 4 p.m. So it is about understanding the nuances of what makes people happy and what is healthy for them, because it's not our job to say what is healthy for our employees. We just can provide guidance, but they decide. So that's kind of how I see it.
It's funny, when I was working at Bitly, every couple sprints we'd reallocate engineers to different projects, and there was one front-end developer I could never get to join my team, and I was always really disappointed because I always wanted him on my team. And finally we had a conversation, this was a long time ago, and he said, you're this like young cool guy who lives on his own. I'm working at 10 p.m. after my kids go to bed. I don't want to be bothering you at 10 p.m. I figure you're like out on the town partying, which is hilarious because I was just at home by myself, like watching Netflix and drinking a bottle of wine, but I was flattered that he thought that. And we basically put together an operating agreement where I was like, what if we agree that 3 days a week we'll both agree to be available during that time, so you're not interrupting me, but I'm not interrupting you. And that worked really well for us. I think one of the themes that keeps coming up in this, Emma Obanye, who's somebody who I hope can speak at one of these sometime soon, she's one of the founders of Mindful Team. She said something to me that I think about all the time, which is that 99% of problems can be solved with communication. And it's really true that like these questions of when should we work, how do we use these tools, they're all conversations to have. And I think a lot of the challenge is just committing to having that conversation and having that conversation together, even if it's something that seems obvious or seems like it is challenging or difficult for people. One question that came up relatedly here in the chat, Thomas asked, how to decide when something is done or complete when working in a fully distributed team. And at first I was like, the same way you did in a co-located team probably, but then I was like, no, I don't know if that's true, because I feel like so much of definitions of done in co-located teams have to do with this sort of ambient sense of like the people who need to approve this have approved it, and we've gotten the right head nods from the right people in the right meetings. So how do we document and explicitly commit to definitions of done when we aren't able to just kind of be like, well, when the CEO nods and says looks good, then we're done? It's a tough question. Thank you, Thomas.
I think it's autonomy, right? It just really depends, because we are a small team, and so we have different criteria. So maybe I can share mine, and then maybe, from Envision, which is huge, and then you will have different kind of, everybody will have different kind of sort of dynamics. But for a very small team, in our case, the way we know that something is done is when they think about it from a feature perspective. Let's say you want to ship something. So it will be, because we have discussed that so much in this kind of documents, and there is like conclusions and things on Trello. We work with this kind of methodology, if you like to call it, burn down, which is a weird version of how we develop, but not the traditional one, the one that Drift uses. So anyway, so what we do is that we explain very clearly what is the job that the user have to be able to do, right? What is the thing that they need to be able to accomplish? And in the process of getting there, we define that solution. But when an engineer can say, if I ship this, people will totally, definitely be able to get the job done because we tested enough, because we feel confident, the engineer ships that thing. So nobody's waiting for some approval in our case. It's such a big responsibility for the engineers to decide that, but it's not in isolation, because everybody's like, okay, we're ready, we're gonna do it. It's a celebration. It's never out of the blue, but it's always the decision of the engineer in our case. So they take all the responsibility, which I love very much. So.
I mentioned the jobs to be done, from ideation all the way to something shipped, and that's no different from who's in the hook to make the decision that something is, ready to go. And that's just especially in remote, every team should have a governance model. Cross-functional team have some kind of governance model, and I think especially in remote, the need for that governance model and probably more detail in that governance model is justified, if not required.
Yeah, I think to kind of summarize one of the themes that's come up, and this goes back to Alexis, some of the stuff you were saying about even like people's office setups and supplies and everything at home, is that when you go into a distributed working environment, you can't really take anything for granted. Like you can't assume that everyone shares a definition of done. You can't assume that things are documented. You can't assume that everybody's home setup is even, like you just can't make assumptions about anything, which means that discipline and that structure you bring to not just the way you communicate, but the way you communicate about the way that you communicate is a really important muscle for us all to build. Thank you all so much for sharing your perspectives and joining for this conversation. I feel like I've learned a lot of stuff. I'm excited to bring some of these things back to the teams I work with. Let's give everyone a round of
Thank you.
applause.
Thank you, Matt.